You're about to listen to an episode of the Leadership Melting Pot podcast, brought to you by Lumerous. Engage with us as we dissect an aspect of leadership and see how you may apply some of what is shared across your business.
You're about to listen to an episode highlighting the topic of leadership in tourism. It was done in observation of World Tourism Day under the theme Rethinking Tourism. Our host for this episode, Deborah Thomas, engaged with the Executive Director of Tourism Diversity Matters, Mr. Greg DeShields.
Hello everyone, I'm Deborah Thomas, working with Lumerous as one of the expert panel members. We'd like to welcome you here this evening. Please let me introduce our guest, Greg DeShields. Greg would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you for the invitation. My name is Greg DeShields. I'm the Executive Director of Tourism Diversity Matters. We're a national organization that addresses issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tourism industry. I'm a native Philadelphian, lifelong hospitality person, and have spent numerous years in different aspects of our industry. But I would say that the role that I carry today is probably one of the most important and significant of my career, because it is really broad-reaching in the industry to ensure that we are an industry of opportunity and inclusion.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, Greg. So this is very much just a conversation between ourselves. So can I start with what is Tourism Diversity Matters story? What's the kind of history, just to share with our audience behind the organization?
Sure. Tourism Diversity Matters are one of what I guess we could call a COVID blessing. We came to light during the summer of 2020. And honestly, we were born out of the murder of George Floyd here in the United States in Minneapolis. Our president and CEO, Mike Gamble, leads an executive search firm, and he was based in Minneapolis and had firsthand view of what was happening in his city and all across the country on issues of social justice, and really heightening a lot of the attention around issues of inequities and the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He felt that this was the opportunity for us as an industry to make a difference and dedicate an organization to issues of DEI, specifically in the tourism industry, that will serve as a resource for those who may or may not be a part of an industry association, those who might be in really tough times that need to be able to connect to a resource that can provide all sorts of information and access, and an organization that can focus on things like workforce development and talent pipeline and supplier diversity, while still keeping a very clear focus on what really drives our industry. And we are an industry that delivers these experiences to individuals as they travel. And we want to ensure that when people travel, that they feel welcome and included, so that we have a successful ability to create economic impact for our destination. So that's really what led to the creation and the ever-evolving role of TDM.
And is it very much about hospitality and travel companies, or does it expand to areas like airlines, for example, or that broader kind of tourism landscape?
So we do represent all sectors. We're actually a collaborative partner with US Travel, which is the Association for the Travel Industry. So as it relates to our organization, we touch all aspects of travel, tourism, whatever specific sector you might be. There is some component of that we will certainly have the ability to be a resource. And as we continue to position ourselves as the sole organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the industry, we're getting clearer and clearer understanding of what that means. And while we certainly might look at the distinction of hotels and, let's say, restaurants and airline, the hotels in themselves have a very unique, complex mix of branded properties and independent properties and franchise properties. So we've certainly found that being that resource can mean a lot to a different number of people, even in one sector. And as you begin to expand it across sectors, if we consistently focus on the issues of the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the economic value it brings to our destinations, the fact that it does give us a strategic competitive advantage. We all know that across all sectors, labor is an issue. So the type of things that we look at is really around the business of our industry, and DEI, and that intersection is what I think cuts across all sectors.
And does sustainability come into that as well as part of the EDI? Is that something that you're also looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. Sustainability and its interface with the conversation of DEI was really heightened during the course of the pandemic, because it really started to show that while we know there are healthcare disparities, there are social determinants of health, which are tied very much to the issues of sustainability, but that has a direct correlation on those individuals who work in our industry. So if they don't live in healthy, thriving, environmentally safe communities, they obviously can't deliver all that they can deliver at work. If they can't get fresh food in their house because they live in a food desert. So the alignment of issues of sustainability and DEI have been even that much made clearer.
Mm-hmm.
And the work that we do often has an alignment with issues of sustainability. Listen, if you talk to the folks in Hawaii right now, they'll tell you we have way too much tourism and we don't want it anymore because of issues of sustainability. So how do you balance that when you also think of issues of equity and access? And that falls under, and that's where the correlation of sustainability and DEI come together.
So as an example, given you've raised Hawaii and that, what might be some solutions to that kind of issue? Because they high tourism levels, great impact on the community. Great issues around EDI. So what would we suggest might be potential solutions to that kind of very kind of common problem, I guess, around tourism generally?
Right. Well, I think in general, we've all known that sustainability was going to become much more center stage in how we do tourism and hospitality. We certainly had very practical ways of how we could engage by looking at how we sort for recycle, or how we limit the amount of water we use, or how often we have rooms cleaned. I mean, all of those things are very practical aspects of how we can engage in that. But looking at it from a bigger perspective and the things that we can do in order to make a difference, the environmental sustainability governance ESG score is now capable of, through tabulations, to show how organizations are making a measured reduction of the negative impact that they have in the tourism sector. And that can be as simple as measuring the amount of waste that's on a beach after it's been used during the course of the day. So we can address those things in the industry, both from a way of building a higher quality of life for those who live in that community, but also for the betterment of our planet, by just simply becoming much more conscious of how we use more sustainable, recyclable products, that we have a higher priority around even how we plan and produce things so that they don't create a great deal of waste, and looking at the impact of a citywide convention and what that does to the community that it's in. Now, we don't want to always say that it boils down to dollars and cents, but maybe it is about groups providing resources for the replenishment of X when they leave to a community, as opposed to the community having to try and find the resources. We can start to look more fundamentally in terms of the actual impact and how we change that. But I do think it's important to take it from the perspective of how we do it in a measured approach. I think just doing it for the sake of doing it doesn't make a difference. It's like, how did we make a difference? What did we change?
Okay. So that leads on to my next question, which you're partly answering, but how can leaders in the hospitality sector rethink tourism? How do we move the dial? What can we change?
Well, I think as leaders of the hospitality industry, and I think leaders of industry, you have to listen to others. While as leaders, obviously, you focus on strategy for the organization, but the more voices that are brought to the table, and quite frankly, voices who are closer to the center of what you're trying to do, the more exact or the more insightful perspectives you have to make a decision. So I would say, as we look at that, and we know that innovation is a great way for us to address some of these, do we have, thought-minded people who are aware of not just how innovation can be implemented. But if we also think about it from a DEI perspective, what kind of coding is done in a lot of the technology or the artificial intelligence that we use that might have in some way bias that could limit access and alienate people from participating. And that's just that process of bringing others to the table through the process around some of the ideas. We know that we are doing more with less. So, how can we be more efficient? But through that process of efficiency, who can also give us the insight as it relates to the able disabled community? Okay, so we've decided that we're going to move to kiosks. Are those kiosks accessible and friendly for somebody who's an amputee or someone who's blind? Like, it's not just putting a kiosk in, but that's where having the voice of others to help make sure you're getting a center of sense of what the work could be and allowing that then to kind of guide your strategy. I think that's where leaders should be.
So on the back of that, what other groups do you think need to either are you already engaged with, or you think need to engage around this space to help you get to where you would like to be around diversity and inclusion and sustainability in tourism?
Well, from the work that we do, obviously we're engaged with a number of leaders across all different sectors. And through that, in a number of organizations, they'll have a key individual who might be held accountable in order to build the concept or the strategy and the idea and build some sort of implementation or action plan associated with it. So the work that we've been doing, and we work with a number of organizations around their assessments, their DEI assessments. So we'll look for gaps in terms of their organization and help come up with some clarity in terms of what is the action plan that they need to take and how do they build that into strategy, and then how do they begin to build an action plan to move it forward. So it is that swath of leaders who may not be at the top of the organization, but are essentially the doers that help to facilitate and move things forward. And those are the ones that we tend to have a lot more interaction with.
Well, that beautifully leads on to my question, which is, why is it important to observe and practice diversity and inclusion tourism, and what does that look like in the hospitality and tourism industry at this moment in time?
So we have approached diversity, equity, and inclusion more from I have to check the box. The other word we hear is we're very performative. We make it look like we've done, like, what did you do? Okay, I'm going to do that too, right?
Yeah.
And then the other is that we've always approached it like we can fix it. I mean, we in the tourism industry, that's what we like to do. We like to fix problems. Oh, your room wasn't clean, we'll fix it. Yeah, but you're not really fixing it for that day. You want to look at the process for every day that there's a dirty room, right? So at the end of the day, I think we've not looked strategically. We've not long-term looked at issues of DEI. And quite frankly, we've never built it from the perspective that it is a journey and an ongoing evolution and DNA component of who we are as a business. And the reality of it is more and more organizations are learning that all of those short stop strategies that we had in the past still haven't really delivered the outcomes that we would like. And more are looking at what are the strategic ideas that we can pursue, thinking of it either from a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, or to be even that much braver to look at it from a master plan. Like, what can we put in a long-term strategy that allows us to have these small wins that continue to build, but with the reality that this is a journey, it's never going to be done, and whoever's doing it now is probably going to pass the baton on to someone else. And I think there we get better. We start to build measurable outcomes. We have a realistic sense of what we need to do to invest in order to achieve success. And then as it relates to anything that we do in our businesses, we evaluate. And sometimes the reason why DEI failed is because you invested nothing in it. You kind of thought it would kind of be successful on its own. And it's like any business function, if it's not funded and invested well, then it really lends itself to a short-term failure.
And so on the back of that, we'll revisit this later. But if you're looking for some just to really, for anyone listening to us, on this podcast, are there some basic guidelines you can give them in terms of kind of low-hanging fruit, quick wins? I mean, it's never about a quick win, and I completely accept all that you said in terms of being the long-term strategy, and we're passing on the mantle to others as we go. But what could be some of the issues you make a difference in this area?
So I'm a big believer around issues of economic impact and economic influence, and that is the supplier diversity side of things. I think it's important for businesses to think of how they can invest in diverse businesses. And if it's not capable because you've worked with the same vendor or the same purveyor provider for a number of years, then that's fine. Then hold that business accountable to diversify their supply chain. I think it's important to realize that we can build long-term relationships around the bundles of diversity, equity, and inclusion in theory, but we can have a much more immediate practical decision if we know, for example, that we have coffee in our employee rec room, and we've never offered the opportunity for a Latino business or a Hispanic business or an LGBT business to take on that whole contract to supply it. Or we know that we always do a 4th of July celebration in our office. Maybe we buy flags or we have a little caterer, but have we ever asked specifically for there to be an Asian caterer to come in and bring? Those are the steps I think that makes a difference. I mean, we can look at things like your marketing contract, we can look at your telecommunication contracts, we can look at a lot of the office administrative supplies that you use, whether it's pens, pencils, cell phones, all of those things you can certainly purchase from a diverse supplier. Now, some will say, I had no idea that there are vendors from those communities. Well, that's where you also educate yourself by either looking at the national ethnic chambers or the local chamber in your community. But I think that idea of taking a more immediate focus around how we can create more economic opportunity and access for diverse businesses allows for you to show within your organization it's a priority, but also in those communities that you reach out to become suppliers for you.
So for you, it's very much both obviously looking internally, working with partners, but also then that external supplier piece, that kind of third and second reach. So really looking in a very holistic way across the piece.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, sometimes to the surprise, you may find that you could get something cheaper than what you're already paying for it. And you can also get it in perhaps a unique new cultural perspective, whether that's, expanded flavors of coffee. Maybe you've only offered just one particular flavor, and maybe this Caribbean coffee producer has a variety of coffee flavors that you didn't even know about. So that's where the idea of being engaged with diverse suppliers can really enhance the way that you do business, because you're now creating new opportunity that just didn't exist.
Yeah. And obviously we're very well about fair trade and coffee from that perspective. But is there, and this is more of also it's a more technical point, but is there an issue for trying to engage with a more diverse group of suppliers around the size of organisation and therefore the supply? And how that's managed with some of the large organizations. So how do you kind of deal with that, for example?
Right. And listen, capability, capacity are without any doubt, at the top of fold. I would say when you are local, you obviously may deal with an independent entrepreneur that does have a capacity issue. That's one thing. There are national organizations, they're usually affiliated with the national chambers that have national federal contracts, large production contracts. So I would say that it exists. There's actually an African-American national toilet paper supplier, which most people don't know in the hospitality industry, but it's an interesting way to learn about who does national contracts, who does local, who does small. And then the other is, though, to think of ways how you can create an opportunity for a small business. Just because they may not have the capacity to do X, they may have the ability to do Y. And maybe as we kind of think of it, maybe they could do a piece. So let's say, for example, you know what, we would love to have a LGBT organization produce our annual luncheon, but they just don't have the capacity. They don't have the bandwidth, So if that's the case, can they collaborate perhaps with an African-American business that can maybe pick up the marketing communication side, and maybe they on the other side will do the production of the luncheon and all that kind of stuff. So it also is maybe thinking through how we can help organizations build capacity as opposed to put it out of it's either this or nothing.
that is a fantastic point to think, and I think it'd be good to share maybe later these different sites and how they find that African producer, or toilet roll, etc. So
I love to tell this one story because I think it's excellent. So
please do, please do.
there's an African American hotel owner or developer. His name is Norm Jenkins. He's a CEO of a firm called Capstone. So in Washington, D.C., there's this beautiful Marriott Marquis, which is next door, 1,500 room hotel. It's absolutely fabulous. And Norm is an African American and is dedicated to support Black businesses. So when he was building the hotel, he really wanted to have an African American firm that could do the drywall for the hotel. And it was a very large contract, but it was difficult to find one in the particular market that he was in. But what he was able to do was to work with some of the smaller African American businesses to develop the models that were used for the hotel, which I thought was fabulous. It was a great way to bring them in the very inception of the hotel and still work within their capacity and be a part of it. And maybe they can grow in other sections of the project as you go forward. But that was a very intentional and deliberate effort on his part to find a way for a small business to be a part of a big project. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic example. Thank you for sharing that with us. So my next example is, or the next question I should say is tourism still relevant in the current landscape of climate crisis, pandemic, inflation, and what I think most of us are thinking is a coming recession? What would be your answer to that?
Absolutely, yes. Now, not because I'm a tourism person, but I will tell you this: if it's one thing we learned during the course of the pandemic, being locked at home, that humans are social. They need to have engagement. Who knew that it was such a big deal to eat out, that people would sit outside and eat when it's like 30 degrees, right? I mean, that desire to come together, be social, and engage as part of the DNA. It's who we are as people. And I think for a lot of those who are really regulated to just small little 500 square feet apartments would be amongst those who would shout that on the highest hills. I think as an industry, we've learned a lot, that we can automatically get hit with a stop sign if we are prepared to be more mindful of what the full extent could be of a pandemic. We've learned that we can provide, a hospitality experience in a safe way. We can provide it in a way that's very mindful of what safety precautions might be established. So I think we've learned as an industry. We were certainly surprised at the significant impact. And I don't think there's anybody in the hospitality industry who didn't think that this was only going to last for a couple of weeks. And then when we realized the long term as an industry, we started to build more of how the industry could survive if we were to have another pandemic. So I think, yes, even with pending challenges perhaps of a pandemic, or even from issues around some financial or economic crisis, as an industry, we've gotten better at how we can do it. Now, we've gone through as an industry many financial crises, so that we know may slow down the rate of growth as it relates to the economic spend by travelers. And we know that it may slow down some of the economic development of hotel properties because of costs in order to develop a project. But those are things that we've navigated throughout time. But I think that having a pandemic and an economic crisis all on you at the same time has learned and has elevated our talent and our expertise, especially leaders of our industry, whether it's through our hotel association, restaurant association, of our meeting associations. We've really learned a lot over the last 2 years that I think have made us stronger as we go forward.
And if I then pick up on the back of that, on the impact, particularly from the tourism and travel side of climate change and that sustainability, and consumers thinking more about that and their impact when they travel, what do you think is the observation around that, and how we make a difference in that space?
Well, I think we have gotten past the point of where it seems like it's only this one sector that's talking about
Absolutely.
sustainability and issues of environmental impact. I mean, listen, car producers here in the United States are moving more to hybrid and electric vehicles. And I think that's probably one of the most clearer indication of where we're going as a country and how we want to make a change. I mean, anytime in the US, you can look and see a lot of these very unusual environmental changes that are just clear indications that we have to be more responsible to that. So I think as opposed to 20 and 30 years ago, it was still somewhat new. I think most people are thinking about it. And the reality of it is you're probably going to have people who are going to fly on a fuel efficient airline, and they will land and wind up getting an electric vehicle at the airport and renting it and then looking for a place to plug in. I mean, that in itself, that the consumer is driving an electric vehicle and looking for where they plug it in, shows that there is the ability to get the consumer to adapt to what those changes might be. So when they come in and they start to see things, I think people become very much familiar with recyclable straws, or like in the state that I'm in, New Jersey, that eliminated plastic bags altogether. They don't exist anymore. So I think those kind of things, consumers are evolving in that. And because in other industries and other staples of how we live our lives, this discussion around sustainability and being environmentally friendly has become clearer and brought into more of the day-to-day things that we do, that I think it'll be not that difficult to continue to build upon it in our tourism industry.
And do you think there's anything that tourism and travel and hotel industry particularly could do to enhance that, to really kind of push that agenda?
I think as an industry, we are a for-profit industry. I think as an industry, as we can think through ways to have a more efficient way to monetize the ways that we go about integrating it in our organizations. Listen, we want to do it for the safety and health of our planet, but at the same day, we're operating businesses. So how can we build in those components? Perhaps they offer greater efficiency. Maybe it allows for us to create some new products and services for our customers, which are aligned with sustainability and being environmentally friendly, while at the same time allowing for us to build our margins within the business operations of our hotel. So I think leaders are thinking that way. There's more curriculums that are coming out of business schools tied to hospitality programs that are focused around environmental and sustainability efforts in the tourism industry, so that next generation of leaders will start to think business-wise how we strike a more profitable, efficient, and customer favorable experience around issues of sustainability in our operations.
Thank you. And what role does tourism and your organization, Tourism Diversity Matters, play in rethinking tourism? How would you define your role?
So, we follow a collective impact model. We believe that there are a lot of great people doing a lot of great work. And it's not necessarily about what we create and what we deliver. It's also how we can amplify the voice of others who do great work. We have a great friend. His name is Ronnie Weiss. He leads an organization called Travel Unity. His organization is one that we've collaborated a lot with because his focus is around issues of accessibility and ensuring that there is a continual experience for customers as they stay in a hotel that provides, incredible experiences for people with limited mobility, but that there's a responsibility to make sure that if I refer that person to go to a drugstore down the street, three streets from me, that there's a continuum of that same experience that they had in the hotel as they go forward. So he looks at that destination and how can there be a focus for the overall destination. And I think that's where we as an organization have the best ability to make an impact. Sure, we want to build a talent pipeline, and we do organizational assessments to teach organizations about their gaps around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're all in it together. And if we can kind of serve as that glue and amplify the work that different organizations are doing, I think that's how we move incrementally the needle forward.
So, and at the moment, is Remit as an organization more US focused, or are you looking more internationally? Where are you at this moment in time on that?
So, we are fortunate to have Ray Bloom, who's the president of IMAX, and they're based in the UK, on our board. And he reminds us to always be global in our thinking. So we are very global in our perspective. I mean, we've had some great engagement with a variety of organizations in the UK, but we are based in the US, and probably closest to us is Canada. We've done some collaborative projects with some folks in British Columbia and on the East Coast near Montreal and Quebec City. So it's kind of organic how we're reaching out to them, but they're so close as it relates that there's no way that we could do this without it. But I will tell you this, that we always look at DEI from a global perspective. We realize that here in the US, we may have one perspective, but if you're in China, if you're in India, if you're other parts of the country, and a lot of times those individuals are visiting here to the US, we have to be mindful that our conversations can't sit on some of the challenges that we may have around race and ethnicity, because in other countries it might be more centered upon their indigenous communities or might be more culturally specific. So we are very much aware that it's not, the US does not have the ownership of DEI, that we all kind of share around the world issues and perspectives.
Yeah, and I think that's the important piece, isn't it? That we share expertise, that we share experience, that we share best practice to ensure that we get as many people on the journey as we can, even though within that there'll be different countries that have different issues, to the US or the UK or whatever. That's very common to take. And I guess it's in terms of the role that you play. How do you ensure that we keep people, organizations like yourself, TDM, and others really relevant in this ever-changing world? How do we ensure that?
So it's funny that you say that, because I was having a conversation with my executive assistants about, so we wanted to, it was important that TDM was in existence so that we knew as an industry that we had an organization that focuses on DEI all the time. Mm-hmm. Especially as we look back when we were started, because there were a lot of organizations that wanted to take on efforts around DEI, and they were called initiatives, and they were called councils and committees and departments, and they had somewhat of a limited shelf life that may have been established for them. But we were established to become this entity that would evolve in terms of its impact and its influence in the industry. And to that degree, it was important that in the beginning of how we positioned ourselves, that phrase, is it a moment or is it a movement, that we emphasize that TDM is the movement. And as it relates to the work that we do at TDM, we always look forward and we always look back to see that we are moving forward as an organization. I think what's been most important over the last 2 years for me is that we have the ability, as I was yesterday, speaking to a group of Convention and Visitors Bureau in the Midwest region of Illinois, right? And these are individuals who may not have the resources and the capability to get access to DEI, but us going there provides all of these small, 2, 3, 4 people, CVBs, insights around DEI that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. So we find it's really important that we are reaching out to what would be considered to be the least likely place that you might think would focus on DEI, and build that into the overall story of what we do.
And I think that's really important in terms of that showing best practice across the industry. And we've certainly got stories we could share here about, treatment of workers within Sydney hotel groups, or the ED&I journey, that we're on, not just in the tourism sector, but across, many businesses. I think it's great that you're sharing all that expertise. I guess my next question is around, I can get some words of encouragement to the players, so in the sector. So what are some of the if you were going to give them a just very quick and easy guide, what are some of the quick wins they could look at? What could they address, quickly to help rethink their D&I strategy, and what would that help them look like in terms of their target audience and location longer term?
I think organizations need to ask themselves the honest question: are we ready for DEI? Like we always say, as an organization, this is what we do, but are we really ready for it? And there is some self-assessment, self-evaluation that you have to take before you go into this. So the first I would say is you have to ask yourself, am I ready for this? Second is, how do you even define it? You'd be surprised how often there are a variety of definitions that are part of a singular organization, which means there's so much contradiction that there's a difficult ability to move forward. I think the third is, who are the sectors which you prioritize? So often when we get into conversations of DEI, it's about race and ethnicity, when in fact there's 19 different dimensions. So, are we talking about gender? Are we talking about sexual orientation? Are we talking about religion? And to that degree, having some sense of who we prioritize, and there's nothing wrong with prioritization because you know where your audience is. But I think that fundamental understanding of, number one, are we ready? How do we even define it? Who do we prioritize? Are some real quick, easy ways to move forward. The only other thing I would just say is there should also be a look at your governance side, your whoever the governing body is. What is the level of knowledge and expertise that they have? I mean, they're the highest decision-making group of the organization. And in some cases, when you poll them, you'd be surprised. They're great board members because they have strong fiduciary responsibility around operating the organization. But if DEI is a strategic priority and pillar for the organization, just how much do they know about that? And a lot of times they're not as expert in that as they are about finance, legal, or some of the other functional roles of a board.
No, I think that's a very fair comment, and I think the back to are we ready for DEI? I think for a number of organisations, and we'll all put our hands up here, is that we're not quite sure. We don't have the expertise. What should it look like? How do we put a policy together? How do we put it into practice? What should be the goals, the outcomes we should look for? So I think in so many instances that guidance is needed, that you do need external support, whether that from a consultancy or bring an EDI person into the organisation. But yeah, it's not an easy piece, and I think it's learning about everyone's journey and embracing all that sort of diversity. And you can't be an expert in everything, but it's really finding a way to embrace and include all that diversity and recognise it in the organisation, and then go on that journey, to get you to a place of comfort, where everyone feels it's a safe space, where they feel positive about their working environment.
But I would also caution individuals to not minimize the degree of expertise that is needed. Because if you fundamentally look at DEI, it's organizational development, it's human psychology. And you can't just pull Susie, who is the person who always wants to do the acknowledgement of certain cultural days, and say she's our DEI person. You really need individuals to have expertise and knowledge in how you navigate the culture of an organization. And an individual has a deep knowledge of how you do that. In a lot of the tourism and hospitality organizations, there are people who have deep knowledge about tourism. They can book a meeting, they can build a hotel, they can run a restaurant, but that does not in any way mean that they are skilled and knowledgeable in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while they may have some basic fundamental familiarization, that's not the deep-rooted knowledge. It's almost like saying, I've watched enough doctor shows where I could go in and do surgery. And you probably can't, right? So I would caution leaders to realize there is expertise. There's credentials that people have. I have a certified diversity executive credential, and the purpose of it was to understand the full scope and nuances, even how, as a organization that embraces DEI, there should be a clear ability to speak, as we say, CFO about DEI. A DEI person should be able to help articulate the integration of it in the financials of an organization so that it is a successful contribution to its overall success. And that's just not anybody who you say, oh, you take DEI today. So
no, I think that you're right. It's the getting everyone on board, getting them to really to embrace with the understanding and the journey that needs to be gone on, but also, as you say, articulating it in terms of the outcomes, but not just financial in that broader piece, but this is the result. And we all know that there have been so many reports that show that the more diversity that you have across your organisation, the better the outcomes generally. But that's also about that inclusive culture and making people feel valued and kind of safe. It's not just about bringing people in and I think ticking a box on it. So it's we always say it's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk.
Yes.
And that's the kind of key goal here. And I think you're right. There's a level of expertise that is required beyond your life experience or your recognition of your own unconscious bias. It's much bigger than that, isn't it? Completely agree. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. So we're just coming, I think, to the end of our time, Greg. We've got a few more minutes, but is there anything else you'd say as a kind of overarching kind of statement, or anything else you'd like to share as part of this podcast? That would be useful to not just to the tourist industry, but more broadly.
The one thing I would say is, as we look at the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it will look different in 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember when the biggest emphasis, maybe back in the early 2000s, was around cultural competency and cultural diversity. And those are still important and they're a part of it. But as we evolved into a conversation that centered upon diversity, and then it evolved to talk about inclusion, and then as we moved into a space of where we started talking more about this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we now see words like belonging and welcoming becoming center stage. So it's also realizing that this is evolving. And even as you build a strategy or you are beginning to chart a course, to realize that the path is constantly moving while you're trying to get on that. So I would encourage individuals to not to become disheartened by the fact that what they thought worked didn't, because the climate changed. We have potential of a very political season ahead of us, which will certainly stoke the fires around perspectives and point of views around DEI. And to that degree, it will mean that as we roll out DEI strategies, we have to realize that this will evolve, and it'll be a lot more sensitive during the summer of 2024 to talk about DEI than it is today, right? So that evolution is just something that we have to be mindful of. So it's not just looking maybe back or just where we are, but really looking forward, like what do we envision and what do we think that change will be?
And so on the back of that, Greg, what does it look like? What do you envision? What might it look like in say 3 years, 5 years time? Where realistically and where would be ideal for us to have got to?
Well, I think as an industry, we'll probably develop more standardized best practice around things like diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. There should be more of a consistent resource for anyone, whether they're with a franchise or a corporate or whatever it is. But I think some of the consistency of the fundamental pieces that are needed should be available. I mean, we see that through Tourism Diversity Matters. We speak to a lot of organizations, and as we talk to them, they just don't have the fundamental knowledge or how to even get the fundamental knowledge. Like right now, one of the big things that is really popular is language of diversity. We do a session about language of diversity. I think those are the kind of things that in 5 years should be easily readily available, whether it's through a portal on our website at TDM that we constantly have a dictionary of language that you can use. We also want to make sure that TDM becomes like this library for all relevant research around DEI in the tourism industry, so that as leaders want to gather a sense of research, data, and insights about the industry, that there's a singular place where you should be able to get that, because right now it's not. Right now you get this report, you get that report, and we'd love to see that all come together and then curate it in a way where the most salient points can be top-lined as really very consistent priorities that could impact the industry. But I think that's, as an industry, where we are headed, that we should be developing more practical resources that are readily available for our industry to move it forward.
And again, in terms of that moving forward, as you know, obviously, you know, a leader in this space, how do we promote CDM? You know, not just across the UK, but more internationally. How do we work with other organisations to create this hub of resources that organisations can call on?
Well, I think one of the things is to help to begin to develop some clear, you know, I don't want to call them key performance indicators, but standards of performance. You know, we can set for our industry specific standards of performance around, once again, supplier diversity. What's the percentage that we should be striding for as an industry? And I think that's industry wide, where there's a ability to move forward. If we know that there's a hodgepodge from 1% of participation to 35% of participation, what's the true number that as an industry we should be expecting to see organizations perform? Even if we look at issues around advancement, we should have more definitive performance metrics established around representation of women and people of color on boards and senior executive levels. So I think that's the kind of movement that needs to be very definitive by way of having performance goals set through a defined resource, whether it's an association leader or a TDM, but giving everybody, as you say, a way of moving forward. This is where we're at, and this is where we need to get to, because that opens up other opportunities that just did not exist at all.
Yeah, I think you do need a stat goal. I mean, we've had things like 1 in 21 here past, and we've got 30% club, and we have, you know, organisations like Women on Boards. You know, we've got various organisations pushing the agenda, but there's nothing like a stat, is there? There's nothing like a number goal that to kind of like push organisations to, you know, to achieve that. So I think you're right on that. What that number is, I don't know, but I think that you're right. We should look at it.
We'll pull all that research together. It'll tell us.
Let's do that. Absolutely. In fact, we don't have a white paper on this particular subject, but normally we got a white paper that we have to support it. But obviously, we do have some research there, and I would add, in kind of rounding this out, you know, that if you go to the Lumerus website, you'll see lots of information that's available to you in terms of either white papers or, you know, general information that you might find useful. And I think that we're just coming to the end of our session. So Greg, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, I would just like
I really appreciate the invitation to do this. You have really asked some very thought-provoking questions, and I think questions that are really central to the core of what we need to do and how we need to look at things from an industry in order to drive forward with a focus around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. And you're a fabulous interview.
Well, thank you. It's honestly, that's a pleasure speaking with you. And I think, you know, I really feel, we as Lumerus feel that it's so important, you know, that the D&I space and contributing to that. But I think that tourism and sustainability has a big piece to play in the future. So I think that's an important, impactful piece that we need to be aware of and share. So I hope that lots of people listen to this podcast. But I say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And I say to everyone who listens to this, if there's anything else you need, please get in touch with us. Do visit, you know, we'll be on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and obviously on our website. So thank you all so much for listening. And Greg, thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. You can also reach us and find out more about us via our website, lumerus.com.